It was a typical Tuesday morning in the small town of Braxton, where everyone knew each other by name, and the pace of life was as steady as the hands of the old town clock. Maya Green, a 28-year-old woman nearing the end of her pregnancy, was returning home from her weekly checkup. She was eager to get back, take a rest, and enjoy the serenity of her little sanctuary in Braxton. The day was warm, the sun casting golden rays across her windshield as she drove along the quiet, winding roads leading out of town. For a moment, everything seemed peaceful, and Maya felt grateful for the life she was bringing into the world, envisioning the little hands and feet that would soon fill her days with laughter. Then, she noticed the flashing blue and red lights in her rearview mirror, and a police siren sounded close behind her. At first, Maya thought it might be for someone else, but as the police car moved closer, it became clear she was the one being pulled over. Confused, she checked her speedometer. She wasn't speeding, and her car was in perfect working order. Her heart skipped a beat as she eased her vehicle to the side of the road and came to a complete stop, mentally preparing herself for what would ideally be a routine stop. Braxton was a small town, and law enforcement was usually polite, if not friendly, to most residents. However, the growing tension in her chest whispered that this might be different. As the officer approached, she recognized him as Sergeant Dale Rayner, a figure known for his stern demeanor and intimidating presence in town. Dale was in his mid-40s, a tall man with a stony expression that never seemed to soften. Maya had heard rumors about his reputation for unfairly targeting certain groups in town, but she had never thought she'd be at the receiving end of his scrutiny. He approached her car with a look that felt accusatory even before he said a word. "License and registration," Dale barked, his voice devoid of warmth. Maya felt a cold sweat forming at the base of her neck, but she maintained her composure, carefully retrieving her documents and handing them over. He took them without a word of thanks, his gaze flickering over her with a mix of disdain and judgment that made her feel suddenly vulnerable. For a moment, he said nothing, just stood there inspecting her papers as though searching for a reason to detain her. "Where are you headed in such a hurry, Miss Green?" he finally asked, his tone laced with an accusatory edge. "I'm just coming back from my doctor's appointment," Maya replied, attempting to keep her voice calm. "I'm 8 months pregnant, so I have checkups every week." Dale didn't seem moved by her explanation. Instead, he narrowed his eyes, glancing around her car as if expecting to find something incriminating. 8 months, huh?" he said, his gaze dropping to her belly with an expression that was hard to read. "Funny how you people always have an excuse." His words hung in the air, and Maya felt a wave of anger and shock rush through her. She knew exactly what he meant by "you people." Trying to keep her cool, she replied, "Is there a specific reason you pulled me over, Officer Rayner? I wasn't speeding or breaking any laws." Dale's face hardened further, his mouth pressing into a thin line. "You don't get to ask questions. You're the one in trouble here, Miss Green. Don't forget that." He leaned closer to her window, the scent of his aftershave sharp and invasive. "We've had reports of suspicious vehicles in the area, and yours happens to match the description. Now, are you going to cooperate, or do I need to make this official?" Maya's heart raced. She wanted to tell him that this was absurd, that she was just a pregnant woman heading home after a doctor's appointment, but she could sense that any attempt to reason with him would only make things worse. She was well aware of how quickly these situations could spiral out of control, especially when the person in power was determined to assert their authority. She gripped the steering wheel, trying to calm herself. She had never felt so trapped, caught between fear and indignation. Just then, she thought of her father. James Green wasn't just her dad. He was the chief of police in Braxton. He had spent his entire career earning the respect of the community, known for his fairness and dedication to justice. But despite his position, they had a complicated relationship. James's career had often kept him away from home, and though he loved his family deeply, he had always put his work first. They hadn't spoken as much in recent months, but Maya knew that if she called him, he would come. Still, her pride held her back. She didn't want to rely on her father to fix her problems, especially one rooted in discrimination and unfair treatment. But as Dale's accusations grew more intense, her fear began to outweigh her pride. She discreetly reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she considered calling her dad. Dale noticed her movement and immediately snapped, "What do you think you're doing? Hands where I can see them." Panicked, Maya froze. She raised her hands slowly, hoping to de-escalate the situation. "I was just going to call my father," she explained, her voice shaking slightly. He's the chief of police." Dale scoffed, an amused sneer twisting his lips. "Chief of police, huh? You really think that's going to scare me? I've been on this force for 20 years, sweetheart. I don't care who your daddy is." His voice tricked with sarcasm and defiance, and Maya felt her stomach drop. He didn't believe her, or worse, he didn't care. At this point, a small crowd had begun to gather nearby, onlookers whispering among themselves as they watched the unfolding scene. Dale seemed to relish the attention, standing tall and imposing beside her car, making her feel smaller and more isolated with every passing second. Maya knew that if this situation continued to escalate, she and her baby could be in real danger. With her heart pounding, she made a split-second decision. Ignoring Dale's previous warning, she reached for her phone once more and quickly dialed her father's number. "Dad?" she said softly when he picked up. "I need your help." James's voice, typically calm and collected, immediately filled with concern. "Maya, what's wrong?" "I got pulled over. It's Officer Rayner. He's accusing me of things I didn't do. And he's not letting me explain. I'm really scared, Dad." There was a moment of silence on the other end, but Maya could sense the intensity building in her father's voice. "Stay right where you are," he said firmly. "I'm on my way. Don't say anything else to him. I'll be there soon." Dale was watching her, suspicion flickering across his face as he saw the determination in her eyes. But Maya didn't care anymore. She knew her father was coming, and for the first time since the nightmare had begun, she felt a glimmer of hope. The onlookers continued to watch, and as Dale shifted uncomfortably, she realized he might finally be sensing the gravity of the situation. As Maya sat in her car, her pulse racing, she tried to calm herself. The sound of her father's voice had reassured her, but there was still an unease that gnawed at her. She could see Officer Dale pacing back and forth, his face a mask of barely contained fury. His irritation seemed to grow with every passing second, fueled by the sight of her sitting there, her phone still clutched in her hand, a lifeline to her father. She wanted to believe that things would be fine once her dad arrived, but something in Dale's expression made her feel like he wasn't done yet, that he had some twisted point to prove. Maya kept her hands on the steering wheel, her fingers gripping tightly. She watched Dale through her window, his jaw clenched, his body tense. He was muttering to himself, almost as if he was deciding his next move. She felt her stomach tighten. Every instinct in her told her that he wasn't going to let this go easily. Her car was her sanctuary for now, but she knew that if he got her out, she'd be at his mercy. She considered locking her doors, but worried that might provoke him further. Dale finally stopped pacing and approached her car, his eyes narrowing as he leaned down to her window. "What's taking so long, Miss Green?" he sneered, as if her father's impending arrival was some sort of joke. "You think this is just going to go away because you made a little phone call? I don't think so. I'm running the show here." Maya forced herself to look at him, her voice barely a whisper. "My father is the chief of police. He'll be here any minute." Dale scoffed, his face twisting into a contemptuous grin. "Your daddy's the chief of police, huh? That's your big defense." He looked around, motioning toward the small crowd that had gathered, as if inviting them to witness his authority over her. "I don't care who your father is. Rules are rules, and I don't make exceptions." Maya felt a surge of anger rise within her. "Exceptions for what, officer? I wasn't speeding. I wasn't breaking any law. You pulled me over for no reason." Dale's face flushed with anger. No reason. He leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. You people always think you can get away with things. I've seen it too many times. Well, not today. Not on my watch. His words hung heavy in the air, dripping with racial undertones that made Maya's skin crawl. She wanted to shout, to demand that he explain himself, but she knew it would only make things worse. Instead, she bit her tongue, reminding herself that her father was on his way, and that she only needed to hold on a little longer. But Dale wasn't finished. He opened her car door abruptly, his hands reaching in to grab her arm. The sudden movement took her by surprise, and she flinched instinctively, her free hand going to her belly protectively. Her mind raced with fear, not just for herself, but for her unborn child. Step out of the vehicle, Dale ordered, his grip on her arm tightening. Maya tried to keep her voice steady. Officer, please, I'm pregnant. You're hurting me. He ignored her, yanking her arm harder. I said, step out of the vehicle. Now. The crowd was watching in shocked silence, some people whispering to each other, their eyes wide with disbelief. Maya could feel their eyes on her, the weight of their silent judgments, but no one stepped forward to intervene. No one dared to go against the authority of the badge, even as they watched the brutality unfolding before them. Officer, please, she said again, her voice trembling as she tried to hold back tears. My father, he's on his way. He'll be here any second. Dale paused, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Your father isn't here yet, is he? Right now, I'm the one in charge. And you. He tightened his grip, leaning in close enough that she could smell the sharpness of his aftershave. You're going to do exactly what I say. Maya's mind was racing, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear anything else. She knew she couldn't fight him physically. He was bigger, stronger, and clearly determined to assert his control. But she also knew she couldn't just give in, not when it meant putting herself and her baby in danger. In that moment, she realized she had only one choice left. Let go of me, she said, her voice firm, louder than she intended. She looked him in the eye, refusing to show fear. This is wrong, and you know it. Dale's face turned a shade darker, his smirk fading as anger flashed in his eyes. For a moment, he seemed taken aback, as if he hadn't expected her to stand up to him. But his surprise quickly turned into rage. He pulled her out of the car forcefully, making her stumble as her feet hit the ground. Maya tried to steady herself, her hand instinctively going to her belly, feeling the slight kick of her baby as if he, too, sensed the danger. Resisting, Dale sneered, tightening his grip on her arm. You want to make this harder on yourself. Maya could feel the eyes of the crowd, some of them murmuring in shock, others looking away, uncomfortable. She tried to lock eyes with a few people, silently pleading for help, but they quickly averted their gazes. It was as if they were watching a tragic play unfold, unwilling to step in and break the illusion of safety their silence provided. Just as Dale was about to pull her toward his patrol car, the sound of sirens filled the air, and a second police vehicle came into view, speeding down the road toward them. Maya's heart leaped with relief. Her father had arrived. James Green pulled up beside them, his face a mixture of anger and concern as he took in the sight of his daughter being manhandled by one of his own officers. He stepped out of his vehicle, his stance commanding, his expression a silent demand for an explanation. Dale's grip loosened slightly as he saw his superior, but he didn't let go completely. He seemed caught between the need to maintain his authority and the reality of who had just arrived. Sergeant Rayner, James said, his voice cold, measured. What exactly do you think you're doing? Dale straightened, his grip finally releasing Maya, though his eyes still burned with defiance. Chief, I was conducting a routine stop. This woman was acting suspiciously, and when I attempted to question her, she resisted. James's gaze flickered to his daughter, who was standing shakily beside him, visibly distressed. His eyes softened briefly as he took in her state, but he quickly turned his attention back to Dale, his expression hardening. I received a call from my daughter. She's 8 months pregnant, and from what I see, you're the one causing a scene." Dale shifted uncomfortably, his face flushing. "With all due respect, sir, she was being uncooperative. She mentioned that you were her father, but I assumed she was trying to get out of trouble." James's jaw clenched, his voice dropping to a dangerously low tone. "So you thought it was appropriate to intimidate a pregnant woman, knowing full well that she posed no threat?" Dale stammered, clearly thrown off by his superior's presence. "Sir, she was resisting, and I was only doing my job." James took a step forward, his gaze unwavering. "And your job, Sergeant Rayner, is to protect the citizens of this town, not to harass them. I'd like to think that's a lesson you should have learned by now." The crowd was silent, watching the exchange with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. For the first time, Dale looked uncertain, his previous bravado fading in the face of his chief's scrutiny. He glanced around, realizing that the support he had once counted on from the bystanders had vanished. They were no longer just observers. They were witnesses to his misconduct. Maya, still shaken, watched her father confront Dale with a sense of awe and relief. She had never seen him so determined, so resolute in defending her. She knew he was risking his reputation, perhaps even his position, by publicly challenging one of his own officers, but in that moment she didn't care. She was grateful, more than she could ever express. James turned to her, his expression softening. "Are you okay, Maya?" She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, Dad. Thank you." He placed a comforting hand on her shoulder before addressing the crowd, his voice steady and authoritative. "I apologize for what you've witnessed here today. This is not how our law enforcement operates, and I assure you, there will be consequences." Dale opened his mouth to protest, but James silenced him with a single, piercing glare. "Sergeant Rayner, you're dismissed from duty for the time being. I'll be conducting a full investigation into this incident, and I suggest you cooperate if you want to keep your position." The crowd murmured, a sense of justice beginning to replace the tension that had filled the air. As James led Maya back to her car, she felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for his intervention, but for his willingness to stand up for her, to break the silence and challenge the authority that had oppressed her. The moment felt surreal, a blend of relief, anger. Maya sat back in her car, the adrenaline from the encounter still coursing through her veins. She couldn't shake the image of Dale's face, twisted in anger and disbelief as her father, Chief James Green, had put him in his place. Her father's commanding presence had always been a point of pride and awe for her, but seeing him step in, unafraid to confront one of his own officers, ignited something deeper, a sense of validation that went beyond just her own safety. She was safe for now, but the realization that this incident could have easily gone much worse lingered like a shadow over her relief. As her father closed the door gently beside her, his face softened from the stern authority he'd shown moments earlier into something more personal, something only a father could show his daughter. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked, his tone gentle, yet weighted with concern. Maya nodded, but she couldn't fully mask the tremor in her voice when she finally spoke. "Dad, I thought—" She trailed off, the emotions catching in her throat. She took a deep breath, looking him in the eyes. "I thought he was going to hurt me. And not just me, the baby too." Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, where her unborn child seemed to stir in response, as if sensing the relief washing over her. Her father's face tightened, a mixture of anger and sorrow flashing across his features. "I won't let that happen. Ever." He squeezed her shoulder, a silent promise in his touch. "You did the right thing by calling me, Maya. This kind of behavior, it's unacceptable. I should have seen the signs with Reiner sooner." James's voice had a note of frustration, a hint that he was wrestling with the idea that he had missed something, that an officer under his command had been harboring such contempt and prejudice right under his nose. Maya had heard whispers around town about Dale Reiner's misconduct before, stories passed around but never officially reported. The unspoken tension between certain community members and the police had often surfaced in her family's conversations, and yet, until now, she had never felt that tension directed at her so personally, so cruelly. As they drove back to the station, where her father intended to file an official report against Dale, Maya felt her initial relief transform into something else. A determination began to simmer within her, a feeling that justice couldn't end with her father's intervention. This incident went beyond her own experience. She thought of all the others who might not have had someone to call, who may have suffered in silence, their stories untold and unresolved. When they arrived at the station, a few officers turned their heads as James led her inside, whispers following them down the hall. Maya could feel their stares, and she wasn't sure if they were looks of pity, curiosity, or judgment. But she held her head high, reminding herself that she had done nothing wrong. They walked into her father's office, where James closed the door behind them, exhaling heavily. He gestured for her to sit, and she did, folding her hands in her lap as he sat across from her. "I want you to know," he began, choosing his words carefully, "that this investigation will be thorough. Raynor has no place in this department if he's going to act this way." Maya looked at him, her voice steady but laced with conviction. "Dad, this can't just end with a suspension or a warning. What he did, it's not just misconduct. It's discrimination, and it's dangerous. He needs to face real consequences." James's gaze met hers, and she could see the struggle in his eyes. He knew she was right. Yet, as a police chief, he was also aware of the hurdles that lay ahead. The town's politics, the union, the resistance from others in the department. It wouldn't be an easy fight. "I know, Maya," he said finally, his voice somber. "You have my word that this will be handled with the seriousness it deserves. But, if you're willing, I think we need to take this further. An official complaint from you would carry weight and make it harder for them to sweep this under the rug." Maya felt a chill of uncertainty, the magnitude of his suggestion settling in. This would mean putting herself in the public eye, sharing her story openly. It would mean risking her privacy, her peace, and perhaps even stirring resentment in the community. But as she remembered Dale's grip on her arm, the cold malice in his eyes, she knew there was no other choice. "Yes," she said, her voice unwavering. "I'll file a formal complaint. I don't want anyone else to go through what I did." James nodded, a hint of pride in his expression. "Then we'll make this right." They spent the next few hours filing the necessary paperwork, documenting every detail of her encounter with Dale. Maya relayed each moment, each hateful word, feeling a strange mix of anger and release as she put her experience on record. Her father listened intently, offering support without interrupting, his face growing darker with each sentence. By the time they were finished, night had fallen, and the station was quiet, save for the hum of overhead lights and the occasional murmur from the few officers still on duty. The following morning, news of the complaint had already spread like wildfire. Social media lit up with posts and comments from locals, some expressing outrage, others dismissing it as a misunderstanding or an exaggeration. Maya's name was now associated with the incident, and she quickly found herself at the center of a whirlwind she hadn't fully anticipated. People she barely knew were weighing in, sending her messages of support or, occasionally, hostility. It was exhausting, yet she knew this was just the beginning. The town was split. Some residents rallied around her, thankful that she was brave enough to speak up, viewing her actions as a necessary stand against prejudice and abuse of power. But others defended Dale, claiming he was just doing his job, accusing Maya of overreacting. It pained her to see friends and acquaintances she had known for years express doubt about her story, choosing to defend a system that had failed her rather than consider the truth of her experience. Amid the growing tension, Maya faced challenges she hadn't expected. Each day, she walked a fine line between protecting her own emotional well-being and staying strong for the cause she had inadvertently become a spokesperson for. Her father, too, was facing immense pressure within the department. James's decision to publicly support his daughter and launch an investigation into Dale was met with resistance from some officers, and whispers of betrayal floated through the department. Even his close colleagues were questioning his loyalties, making him feel isolated in his own precinct. But James stood firm. He would not back down, not this time. He had sacrificed much of his family time for his career, but now he was willing to risk his career to protect his daughter and to ensure that the values he believed in were upheld. It wasn't long before the investigation brought to light Dale's long history of complaints. Several people in the community came forward, sharing stories of mistreatment, prejudice, and intimidation that they had endured at Dale's hands. Women, minorities, and other marginalized individuals stepped forward, each story reinforcing the reality of the officer's behavior. Maya's courage had emboldened them, and soon Dale's defense began to crumble. The town's leadership, now under pressure from the community and local media, had no choice but to take action. Dale was formally suspended pending further investigation, and a hearing was scheduled. For many in the community, this felt like a step forward, a moment where accountability was finally being enforced. But Maya knew that real justice wasn't just about punishing one person. It was about addressing a system that allowed people like Dale to thrive in positions of power. Throughout the ordeal, Maya leaned on her father, who remained a constant source of strength. Their relationship deepened as they navigated the storm together, both facing their own fears and insecurities. For James, it was a chance to rebuild the bond he had strained over the years, and he found himself more determined than ever to protect his daughter, not just from Dale, but from a world that had shown her its uglier side. In the weeks leading up to the hearing, Maya prepared herself mentally and emotionally. She knew that standing up and speaking her truth wouldn't erase the pain, but it might prevent someone else from enduring it. The night before the hearing, her father sat with her, offering words of encouragement, reminding her of her strength and the importance of her courage. The day of the hearing arrived, and as Maya stepped into the courthouse, she felt the weight of her choice. She saw faces she recognized. Some were supporters, others looked skeptical or even hostile. She took a deep breath, focusing on the reason she was there. Dale, seated across the room, avoided her gaze, his expression a mixture of resentment and defiance. When it was her turn to speak, Maya looked directly at the panel of officials. She spoke clearly, detailing her experience with conviction and dignity. She didn't embellish or soften her words. She told the truth, letting each word resonate. She wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for everyone who had suffered in silence, everyone who had felt the sting of prejudice and the abuse of authority. By the end of her testimony, the room was silent. Her father sat in the back, his eyes filled with pride and a touch of sadness. He knew that this experience had changed her forever, but he also knew that she had risen above it, transforming her pain into a force for justice. As they left the courthouse together, Maya looked up at him, a small, weary smile on her face. "Thank you, Dad," she said. As Maya and her father stepped out of the courthouse, a group of reporters surged forward, microphones and cameras thrust in their direction, capturing every step. Maya felt a knot tighten in her stomach as questions were hurled at her from all sides. "Miss Green, how do you feel after today's testimony? Chief Green, are you concerned about backlash from within the department? Do you believe this case will change the way officers are held accountable?" Maya took a breath, glancing at her father, who gave her an encouraging nod. She straightened, meeting the gaze of the reporter closest to her. "I came here today because no one should feel unsafe in their own community," she said, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "Today was about telling the truth. This isn't just about me. It's about ensuring that our police force protects everyone equally." Her father, Chief Green, stepped forward, his tone calm but authoritative. "We owe it to our community to make sure justice is served," he added. "This investigation is a necessary step in addressing the issues that have been brought to light." As they made their way through the crowd, Maya's words echoed in her mind, strengthening her resolve. She had spoken not just for herself, but for everyone who had been affected by injustice. But as they reached the car, she couldn't help but notice the subtle glances from some of the officers standing near the courthouse doors. The looks were a mixture of discomfort, resentment, and perhaps even a hint of betrayal. They weren't just facing an external battle with the public or the courts. They were up against a culture within the department itself, one that would not be easily changed. That night, Maya sat in her living room, her thoughts heavy with the day's events. She was exhausted, but sleep felt elusive. Her phone buzzed with messages, some from friends and family offering support, others from strangers who had seen her story in the news. She scrolled through the messages, her heart warming at the outpouring of encouragement, but a few harsh, angry comments caught her attention. Some called her a troublemaker, others accused her of trying to ruin a man's career for personal gain. The negativity stung, but she reminded herself that this backlash was a small price to pay for standing up for justice. Just as she was about to put her phone away, she received a call from an unknown number. She hesitated but decided to answer, expecting it to be another reporter or possibly even a supportive community member. To her surprise, it was one of the other officers from her father's department, Officer Emily Sanchez, a young, thoughtful woman whom Maya had met a few times in passing. "Hi, Maya, it's Emily," she said, her voice slightly shaky. "I just wanted to reach out. I saw what happened today, and I want you to know that not everyone in the department feels the way Dale does. Some of us are standing with you, even if it doesn't always seem like it." Maya's heart lifted a little. "Thank you, Emily. That means a lot. I wasn't sure if anyone in the department understood what this meant to me, or to the community." Emily hesitated before responding. There are officers who are afraid to speak up, especially against someone as entrenched as Dale. But your courage is making a difference. I think more people will come forward now, people who have been silent for too long. The conversation with Emily reignited a spark of hope in Maya. Maybe change was possible, not just for her, but for the whole department. She thanked Emily and ended the call, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. But even as hope took root, she knew the days ahead would not be easy. The backlash was only beginning, and she would have to dig deep to withstand the inevitable challenges. Over the next few days, as the hearing continued, Maya's life became a whirlwind of interviews, court proceedings, and public statements. Dale's lawyers tried to discredit her, casting doubt on her character and questioning her motives. They painted her as someone looking for attention, someone trying to use her father's position to further her own agenda. Maya felt the sting of each accusation, but she stood her ground, answering each question calmly and consistently, refusing to let their words shake her. The public reaction to the case was intense. Local news outlets covered the proceedings daily, and Maya's story spread beyond the small town of Braxton, sparking conversations on social media and in communities nationwide. People were divided. Some saw Maya as a hero, a voice against the systemic issues that plagued law enforcement, while others viewed her as a threat to their perception of security, as if by questioning one officer's actions, she was undermining the entire institution. But Maya knew the truth. She wasn't against the police. She was against abuse of power and the unchecked authority that allowed officers like Dale to operate without consequence. Her father, meanwhile, faced his own challenges within the department. He had always been a respected figure, known for his integrity and fairness, but his stance in support of his daughter put him at odds with many of his colleagues. Some officers avoided him entirely, their loyalty to Dale evident in their silence. Others openly criticized him, whispering about how he had betrayed the brotherhood. James felt the strain deeply, but he remained resolute, refusing to waver in his support for Maya. He knew that standing with her was the right thing to do, even if it cost him friendships and respect within the department. As the case neared its conclusion, Maya received an unexpected visitor at her home one evening. It was Sarah Lawson, a middle-aged woman from town, someone Maya recognized but didn't know personally. Sarah seemed nervous, her hands fidgeting as she stood on Maya's doorstep, but her eyes held a look of determination. "I know you don't know me well. Sarah began, her voice quiet. "But I wanted to thank you for what you're doing. I had an encounter with Dale a few years back. Nothing like what you went through, but he was rude and intimidating. He made me feel small, like I was nothing. I didn't think I could do anything about it at the time, but seeing you stand up to him, it gave me courage." Maya invited Sarah inside, and they talked for hours. Sarah's story, though different in many ways, resonated deeply with Maya. It was a reminder of the ripple effect her actions were having. The way her decision to speak up was empowering others to confront their own experiences. Sarah wasn't the only one who came forward. Over the following days, more people reached out to Maya, sharing similar stories of interactions with Dale that had left them feeling violated and powerless. Each story strengthened her resolve, reinforcing the importance of what she was fighting for. Finally, the day of the verdict arrived. The courtroom was packed with community members, reporters, and supporters. Maya felt a mix of nerves and anticipation as she took her seat, her father sitting beside her, his presence a source of steady comfort. Dale sat across the room, his face pale, his usual bravado replaced by a tense, rigid expression. His lawyer had argued tirelessly in his defense, but the weight of evidence and witness testimonies had turned the tide against him. The judge entered, and a hush fell over the room. After a brief statement, the judge announced the verdict. Dale Rayner was found guilty of misconduct and abuse of power, and he would be dismissed from the police force effective immediately. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, some people cheering, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Maya felt a surge of relief and vindication wash over her, but she knew this was only one victory in a much larger battle. As they left the courthouse, Maya and her father were met with a crowd of supporters, people cheering and offering words of encouragement. Reporters flocked around them, eager for a statement. Maya looked at her father, and he gave her a nod, encouraging her to speak. "I'm grateful for the outcome today," Maya said, her voice steady and strong. "But this isn't just about one man. It's about making sure everyone in our community feels safe, respected, and protected. I hope this case serves as a reminder that no one is above the law, and that standing up for what's right is worth it, no matter the cost." As they walked away, Maya felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had fought not just for herself, but for her community, for people like Sarah and the others who had been afraid to speak up. Her father put an arm around her, a silent gesture of pride and solidarity, and they walked together toward a future that felt a little brighter, a little more just. The weeks that followed saw real change in Braxton. A task force was established to review the conduct of officers in the department, and new policies were implemented to increase transparency and accountability. Maya continued to receive messages of gratitude, and though she faced occasional criticism, she knew that she had made a difference. Her relationship with her father had grown stronger, forged through shared struggle and sacrifice, and she knew they would continue to fight for justice together. One evening, as she reflected on everything that had happened, Maya found herself wondering about the future. She hoped her story would inspire others to stand up, to speak out, to believe that change was possible. With a quiet smile, she whispered to herself, it was worth it. Every moment was worth it. And in her heart, she knew that, for the first time in her life, she had found her voice. In the days following the trial, Braxton seemed different. The town felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted, but it was clear that the wounds from this case would take time to heal. For Maya, the trial had been a victory, but she knew that true justice extended beyond the courthouse. As she walked through the town square, she saw familiar faces, some offering supportive nods. Others averted their eyes, unwilling to meet her gaze. The community was still divided, and the rift that had been exposed would require more than just a verdict to mend. As Maya went about her daily life, she found herself drawn to community centers and town hall meetings, where people discussed issues of racial equality and police accountability. Inspired by her case, residents started coming forward with ideas, pushing for police reform, sensitivity training, and stricter oversight. Maya's story had sparked a movement, And while she hadn't anticipated becoming a public figure, she accepted this new role with humility, using her voice to amplify the concerns of others who had felt overlooked and mistreated. It wasn't long before local organizers reached out to Maya, asking her to join a committee dedicated to overseeing the implementation of new policies within the police department. This committee, a direct result of her trial, included community leaders, activists, and representatives from the police force itself. The idea was to create a bridge between law enforcement and the community, to open lines of communication that had long been ignored. Maya knew it would be challenging to face officers who still resented her, but she saw this as an opportunity to build something meaningful, a chance to create lasting change. The first meeting was tense. Maya entered the room, her head held high, but she could feel the eyes on her, some openly hostile, others curious. At the table sat her father, who had insisted on joining the committee to support her, along with a few other officers, including Emily Sanchez, who had privately expressed her support during the trial. Dale's absence was noticeable, but Maya knew he still lingered in the minds of everyone present. His actions had been the catalyst for this entire initiative. The discussions began awkwardly, with some officers expressing concerns about public perception and how the case had impacted morale within the department. One officer, Sergeant Tom Hensley, voiced his frustration, his words laced with bitterness. "It feels like we're being painted as villains here," he said, his gaze lingering on Maya. "One bad apple doesn't mean the whole department is rotten." Maya took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "I understand that this is difficult," she began, her tone calm but firm. "But we can't ignore the fact that the one bad apple phrase doesn't account for the silence of others." Dale's behavior wasn't new. People knew, but no one spoke up. This isn't about tarnishing the reputation of the police. It's about accountability, ensuring that every officer represents the values our community deserves. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, the room was silent. Hensley shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable, but he said nothing further. Emily nodded in support, adding, "Maya's right. We can't keep defending people who misuse their power. It makes it harder for the rest of us who are trying to do our jobs with integrity." The discussion gradually shifted toward actionable steps. Ideas flowed: routine bias training, community outreach programs, an anonymous reporting system within the department. Maya felt a surge of hope as more voices joined in, officers and civilians alike beginning to collaborate. The tension was still there, but for the first time, she sensed a willingness to listen and understand. One of the more groundbreaking suggestions came from a local activist, Reggie Collins, who proposed a ride-along program, allowing community members to accompany officers on their patrols to gain first-hand insight into the daily challenges and responsibilities of police work. Reggie, a tall man with a calm, commanding presence, explained the program with enthusiasm. "If we want transparency, let's create it. Let people see what officers go through. And equally important, let officers see the community members as more than just names in a report. Let them see the human side." Maya loved the idea. She could see the value in breaking down the walls that had been built through years of mistrust. Her father agreed, and soon the committee was drafting a proposal to present to the town council, outlining the new programs they hoped to implement. The discussions were hard, and not everyone was supportive, but for the first time, there was a sense of forward momentum, a shared commitment to building a safer, more just community. Despite these positive steps, Maya still faced backlash from parts of the town. Some residents remained vocal in their opposition, feeling that the reforms were unnecessary or overly critical of law enforcement. Rumors swirled, some people accusing her of seeking attention or trying to break down the police force. She received anonymous letters, some filled with hateful language, others mocking her efforts. Though her father tried to shield her from these attacks, Maya knew he couldn't protect her from everything. The backlash was painful, but she reminded herself that change was often met with resistance. She found strength in the support of those who believed in her, especially the people who had come forward with their own stories of mistreatment. As weeks turned into months, the reforms began to take root. The Ride Along program launched with a series of community workshops, where officers and residents gathered to discuss their expectations and concerns. Maya attended every session, her presence a testament to her commitment to the process. She listened to stories from officers who shared the difficulties they faced on the job, understanding that the challenges were complex and not easily solved. Likewise, she heard from community members who spoke of their fears, their frustrations, and their hopes for a better relationship with the police. Through these interactions, Maya saw a gradual shift in attitudes. There was an increased sense of empathy on both sides, and the ride-alongs fostered a newfound respect between officers and residents. Maya herself participated in one of the ride-alongs, spending a day with Emily as they patrolled Braxton's neighborhoods. It was an eye-opening experience. She witnessed the patience required to de-escalate tense situations, the compassion needed to interact with vulnerable community members, and the split-second decisions that officers faced regularly. The experience gave her a more nuanced perspective, and she came away with a deeper appreciation for the complexities of police work, even as she remained committed to accountability. Meanwhile, Maya's story continued to inspire others beyond Braxton. Community leaders from neighboring towns reached out, asking her to speak at events, share her experiences, and offer advice on implementing similar reforms. She accepted invitations cautiously, aware of the toll that public scrutiny had taken on her. Yet, as she stood before audiences, recounting her story, she realized the power of her voice. Each time she spoke, people listened, their faces reflecting a mixture of empathy, shock, and admiration. Maya had become more than just a symbol of change in Braxton. She was a voice for a movement that was growing across the region. Back in Braxton, the police department began to see real changes. Officers like Emily found themselves stepping into roles as mentors, guiding younger recruits in the new culture of accountability and transparency. Even some of the more resistant officers began to adapt, realizing that the reforms were not about punishment, but about building a stronger, more respected department. Maya's father played a crucial role, advocating tirelessly for the new programs and standing by his daughter, despite the personal and professional challenges he faced. His own reputation grew, and he became known not just as the chief of police, but as a leader unafraid to prioritize justice over loyalty to outdated norms. One day, as Maya was heading to a committee meeting, she was approached by Sarah Lawson, the woman who had come forward after her trial with her own story of mistreatment by Dale. Sarah hugged her tightly, tears in her eyes. "Maya, I don't know if you realize how much you've done for this town. For people like me, you made us believe that things could change." Maya hugged her back, a lump forming in her throat. "Thank you, Sarah. I couldn't have done any of this alone. It's people like you, who were brave enough to come forward, that made this possible." As the months went by, Braxton continued to heal. The town was far from perfect, but there was a renewed sense of unity, a collective commitment to creating a community where everyone felt safe and respected. Maya's journey had been challenging, filled with painful moments and personal sacrifices, but in the end, it had led to something far greater than she could have imagined. In a quiet moment, as she reflected on the past year, Maya sat on her porch, watching the sunset. Her life had been irrevocably changed by that one encounter, but she no longer saw herself as a victim. She was a survivor, a fighter, a catalyst for change. Her father joined her on the porch, and they sat in comfortable silence, sharing an unspoken bond forged through their shared battle for justice. After a while, her father turned to her, his eyes filled with pride. "You know, Maya," he said softly, "you've taught me more than I ever could have taught you. I couldn't be prouder." Maya smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Dad. You were my strength when I needed it the most." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Maya felt a deep sense of peace, a feeling she hadn't known in a long time. She knew there would always be challenges, that the fight for justice was ongoing, but she was no longer afraid. She had found her purpose, her voice, and a community that stood beside her. Months passed, and Braxton began to feel like a town reborn. The changes Maya had helped inspire continued to ripple throughout the community, affecting not only the police department, but the very fabric of life in Braxton. There was a newfound energy, an openness in conversations that once had been whispered in hushed voices or hidden behind closed doors. People felt empowered to share their experiences, to speak openly about the challenges of racial inequality and systemic reform. Maya watched as her town transformed, feeling proud yet humbled by the role she had played. One of the biggest impacts of her efforts was seen in the schools. Local educators began implementing programs on social justice, empathy, and conflict resolution, weaving these topics into the curriculum to nurture a new generation of students who understood the importance of respect and equality. Teachers invited Maya to speak to the students, to share her story and the lessons she had learned. Standing in front of young, curious faces, Maya felt a responsibility to instill hope and resilience. She spoke to them about courage, about the importance of standing up for what's right, and about the power of empathy. The students listened intently, their eyes wide with admiration and curiosity. After her talk, a young girl approached Maya shyly, holding a small notebook clutched to her chest. "Ms. Green," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I want to be like you when I grow up. I want to help people." Maya knelt down to the girl's level, her heart swelling with pride and emotion. "Thank you, sweetheart," she replied, smiling warmly. "You already have everything you need to make a difference. Just remember to be brave, to listen, and to treat others with kindness." As the girl beamed up at her, Maya felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She realized that this was the true legacy of her struggle, giving young people the inspiration to create a world where justice and compassion prevailed. Meanwhile, the committee overseeing the police reforms had made considerable progress. The Ride-Along program was now a well-established part of the department's community engagement efforts, allowing residents to gain first-hand experience with police work and fostering transparency. Officers and civilians alike praised the program, with some officers admitting that it had reshaped their views on policing and helped bridge the gap between them and the community. Relationships that had once been defined by distrust and suspicion were now evolving into partnerships built on mutual respect. Maya continued to serve on the committee, working alongside her father, Emily Sanchez, and community members like Reggie Collins, the activist who had proposed the Ride-Along program. Their meetings, which had once been tense and fraught with disagreements, now ran smoothly, as the committee members learned to work together with a shared vision. They developed initiatives that went beyond the police department, including community workshops on bias and prejudice, safe spaces for people to share their experiences, and even a town hall series on equity in education, housing, and healthcare. Braxton was becoming a model town, a place where people were actively working toward equity and accountability. Despite the positive changes, Maya's journey was not without its challenges. She continued to face opposition from certain residents who clung to old prejudices and resisted the evolving culture of the town. Some people still sent her hate mail, and there were occasional confrontations in public where individuals accused her of ruining the town's reputation or disrespecting law enforcement. At times, the criticism weighed heavily on her, but she knew that standing up for what was right meant facing opposition, even from her own community. Her father reminded her often that progress was a marathon, not a sprint, and that real change would come slowly, with setbacks along the way. One evening, as she returned home after a committee meeting, Maya received an unexpected visit from someone she hadn't seen in years. Rachel, an old high school friend. Rachel had left Braxton shortly after graduation, and the two hadn't stayed in close touch. But as Rachel sat down in Maya's living room, she revealed that she had been following Maya's story from afar, feeling inspired by her courage. "You've changed this town, Maya," Rachel said, her voice filled with admiration. "And honestly, seeing what you've done here has made me want to make a difference too. I realized I've been avoiding hard conversations in my own life, just because it was easier to ignore them. But you've shown me that silence isn't an option if we want to make things better." The two friends spent hours catching up, talking about everything from their old memories to their dreams for the future. Rachel shared her own plans to start a social justice initiative in the city where she now lived, and Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that her actions had inspired change beyond Braxton. The reunion reminded her that the fight for justice was interconnected, that each person's efforts contributed to a broader movement. Around this time, Maya was also approached by a local journalist, Lisa Howard, who had been documenting the impact of Maya's case on the town. Lisa wanted to write an in-depth piece, one that would capture not only the legal ramifications of the case, but the emotional and cultural shifts it had sparked in the community. Maya was initially hesitant, wary of being thrust into the spotlight once more, but Lisa assured her that the story would focus on Braxton as a whole, highlighting the voices of community members who had been affected by the changes. Over the course of several interviews, Maya shared her thoughts, emotions, and reflections on everything that had transpired. Lisa also interviewed other key figures: her father, Emily, Reggie, and even some of the residents who had initially opposed the reforms. The resulting article, titled "A Town Transformed: The Fight for Justice in Braxton," was published in a regional magazine and quickly garnered attention. People from neighboring towns and even other states reached out to express their admiration, with some local leaders asking for guidance on implementing similar reforms in their own communities. The article's success brought a fresh wave of recognition to Maya, but it also opened her up to a new level of scrutiny. She received invitations to speak at conferences, community forums, and universities. At first, she was overwhelmed by the attention, feeling unprepared to become a public figure. But with encouragement from her father, she decided to embrace this new role, seeing it as an opportunity to share the lessons she had learned and inspire others to advocate for justice. Her first speaking engagement took place at a university not far from Braxton, where hundreds of students, faculty, and community members gathered to hear her story. Standing on stage, Maya felt a familiar mix of nerves and determination. She spoke about the importance of community, the courage it took to confront injustice, and the resilience required to stay the course. Her words resonated deeply, and afterward, people lined up to thank her, some with tears in their eyes. She realized that her journey had given others hope, that her story had become a beacon for those seeking change. Back in Braxton, the positive momentum continued. The police department's culture shifted as new policies and training programs took hold. The hiring process became more stringent, with a focus on diversity and sensitivity to social issues. Younger recruits, inspired by Maya's story, approached their roles with a sense of responsibility, understanding that they were part of a new generation of officers committed to serving and protecting everyone in their community. One day, as Maya walked through town, she noticed a mural painted on the side of a building near the town square. The mural depicted a vibrant scene of people from all walks of life standing together, a symbol of unity and resilience. At the center of the mural was a figure that looked strikingly like her, standing with a hand extended toward the people around her. She stopped, overcome with emotion, realizing that this was the town's way of honoring her journey and the impact she had made. A plaque below the mural read, "To those who stand for justice, we are forever grateful." Maya's eyes filled with tears as she took in the mural. She hadn't sought recognition or fame. She had simply wanted to make her town a better place. But this mural was a testament to her courage, a reminder that her actions had not only transformed her own life, but had left an indelible mark on Braxton. She was surrounded by townspeople who had gathered to admire the artwork, and they smiled and nodded at her, their expressions filled with respect and gratitude. As she walked home that evening, Maya felt a profound sense of peace. Her journey had been arduous, marked by pain, resistance, and self-doubt, but she had persevered, and the results were visible in every corner of her town. Braxton was no longer just a quiet town. It was a place where people felt empowered to speak up, to fight for what was right, and to build a future where everyone was treated with dignity. That night, as Maya sat on her porch, Watching the stars, she reflected on the path that had led her here. She thought about the fear she had felt on the day of her encounter with Dale, the strength she had drawn from her father, the support of her community, and the allies she had gained along the way. She realized that the fight for justice was never truly over, that there would always be work to do, voices to uplift, and lives to protect. But now, she was ready for it. She had found her purpose, her resilience, and her place in the world. With a deep breath, she whispered to the night sky, "This is only the beginning." And as the cool evening breeze swept over her, she felt a quiet, unshakable certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be.